Welcome to Mike Happens, a podcast that brings you inspiring, funny, and authentic stories about resilience, life's unexpected journeys, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. My name's Jay Conor Reilly, your host, and as a voiceover artist who's also navigating life with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I've learned firsthand that life's toughest moments often make the best stories. All right, you guys, we are back for another episode of Mike Happens. I'm your host, Jay Conor Reilly, and this episode we are going to dive into the whole shoulder/ski injury because I hurt more than my shoulder. But yeah, we're going to jump into that today, why it's so important to keep moving forward even when you're having difficult times like this, and also why you never call last run on the mountain. We're going to talk about that and some of the, superstitions behind that. And yeah, I'm very excited to jump into this and explain it and get into what happened. I've had a lot of questions about it. I don't think I fully have told many people the story. So I think we're going to just go from start to finish for the most part on this and, a couple things in between. So thanks for joining me on another episode here. Let's dive into it. All right, so before we dive fully into what happened on the day of me wrecking myself entirely, I want to get into a little bit on the whole, I mentioned the last run of the day. So that's something in the skier, snowboarder community and just, anyone that does any sort of, I guess, snow sports on the mountain. Because, I guess there's not skiing and snowboarding anymore. You got bikes and trikes and all different kind of stuff now. But anyways, the last run. So the last run is very much a superstition thing, and it's more so you're not supposed to call last run. So let's say you are on your actual last run of the day. You want to say something along the lines like, let's do a couple more than we're done. Something along that kind of frame, not, hey, this is the last run. We're done after this. And I'm not necessarily always a superstitious person. I think I am a little bit, particularly when I played sports and kind of that realm. I had certain things that I would do that I felt like, made me play better or whatever the case is. Particularly in baseball. I feel like baseball has a lot of that superstition thing. So I certainly had some, I guess, routines that I would normally do. So sometimes, I do lean into the superstition of things. But this is the first time that I accidentally called last run and I actually got injured. Which again, I will dive into that once we get into the shoulder story. So I want to touch on a little bit of, I guess, my skiing past and skiing history and stuff of that nature. But skiing, I did a little bit throughout my childhood. There's a few times that we went and, I loved it every time. Like, it was always a great time. But I was never necessarily a quote unquote skier family. We didn't go like every weekend. We didn't have like a, season pass. But I always really loved it. And then fast forward to, I want to say 2018, 2019. At this point, I am now, 10 years removed at least from skiing, I would say. And, I am since a grown adult. I am no longer a child that is, 4 feet and change and flying down the mountain and, not really stopping. I was a little speedy guy, speed demon, I guess. So now I am a, 6'2", full grown adult. I'm one of the bigger guys on the mountain in terms of, I guess, height and, so for me, I started again, I would say probably 2018, 2019. I think around 2018 was started dabbling back into it. My partner and we have since continued. I had to take a break at some point because I did actually injure my ankle and had to get ankle surgery, so I had to take a whole year off on that. Anyways, for me, it can certainly be taxing on my body, and with my Ehlers-Danlos, it's might not be always medically the best thing that I can be doing for myself, so to say. But I have found other people that have my condition that do ski and snowboard, and actually I've found that more people are snowboarding that have Ehlers-Danlos from just my small research. I could be wrong. I'd love to hear if anyone is listening with Ehlers-Danlos, if you ski or snowboard, or I guess what sports you're into. I'd love to hear. But yeah, back to that. For me, I really enjoy it because wintertime, I'm in New England, so the winter blues and just the winter slows us down a little bit. We don't get outside as much, so to say. And for me, I really enjoy that about skiing. It really helps me in the winter and makes the winter that much more enjoyable. I feel more productive, and it's a great outlet. Like my last episode, I was kind of talking about, permission to pause. For me, it's great recharge, and I think the great thing about skiing is it's something that you have to dial into and you have to focus on, or you're going to get hurt, I guess. So, I do like that because you do have to focus on what you're in and what you're doing. So there's not really an outside force that can kind of stop you, unless, again, it's, the mountain. The mountain can certainly do that. So yeah, for me, again, skiing is a great outlet and I really enjoy it. And, it might be taxing on my body more than the normal person, but I do take some extra precautions. I have, braces and stuff that kind of help keep things together a bit. So yeah, for me, for now, this is a great outlet and I'm going to do it, I guess as long as my body permits, I would say. And considering the injury, shoulder, and I actually also hurt my hip in that injury. So it's certainly something to remember and reflect when I go and start to jump into skiing again. So as many people know that is in the skiing community, I think pretty nationwide, but at least on the East Coast, we're very much known as the Ice Coast. And we certainly go through our melt and refreeze cycles, so it is certainly, I feel like, different than the West Coast, and I've heard it many times. I haven't particularly had the chance to ski out west yet. However, prior to my injury, this had to have been one of the best seasons I experienced, especially in recent years. I do think, global warming and all of that has really taken an effect on the skiing community in the mountains. Particularly, they're putting a lot more money into snowmaking, especially, again, Northeast, I'm very much aware with, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, even Little Rhode Island's got a little something down there. But yeah, a lot of these mountains have really felt the effects of the global warming and the effects of all of that, and it's really catching up with the mountains. And I feel like the mountains are, they're just trying to throw the water out of the boat, But anyways, like I was saying, this was probably one of the best years most recently in terms of conditions. We're getting a lot of powder days. At some point, I feel like we're doing better than the West Coast. There was a lot of raining on the West, and we were getting snow, which normally isn't the case, especially, again, in recent years. And for us, we had some great days at some other mountains, and it was we had some great timing with conditions and getting powder and some just really nice snow. And some areas, shout out to Jay Peak. Jay Peak, I think, finished in, top 5, I want to say. I know when I was paying attention, they were top 5. They could have trickled down a little bit. But for the whole country, Jay Peak had that much snow. I don't even remember what their inches for that season, for this season was. But yeah, they killed it. I love it up there. I also got to explore some new mountains, so that was really cool. I got to do some up in Maine. That was really awesome. So I was super excited to try out some new mountains this year too. So that was a bummer, especially leading into the injury. The day I was injured, I was actually at a ski resort in southern New Hampshire. Goes by the name of Ragged. One of my favorite, I would say, in New Hampshire in general. When the conditions are good, it's a great time there. And it's a good mid-sized mountain that, it's not too small, it's not too big, but it's a good in between. If you're a big mountain person, I think you can find some pretty good fun at that mountain, and someone that has used to even smaller mountains, I think they have a easy time transitioning into that instead of going to, let's say, a bigger mountain like Killington, where a lot of trails, it can be a bit overwhelming. But that day particular, I knew the next day coming was a powder day, and from my recollection, it was on the softer side. I think it got a little warm, I want to say, but it was kind of bumpy. For the most of the day, we were in the glades. Big person on the woods, and again, we don't always get to enjoy that because the East Coast can a lot of times be a bit cruel in terms of that. We don't always get the glades, and again, like I said, a lot of mountains are kind of putting into the snow making aspect of things, and that's great for the trails, but when you like going in the glades, you got to wait for the snow. So thankfully, at this point, Ragged did have a decent amount of snow in the woods, and we're going in the woods, and it was a great time. I did that for, I would say, 80 to 90% of the day. And then I also got to explore some new mountains, so that was really cool. I got to do some up in Maine. That was really awesome. So I was super excited to try out some new mountains this year too. So that was a bummer, especially leading into the injury. So on that day, like I said, you got to be dialed in, you got to be focused, and you don't call last run is something that I've learned. So like I said, most of the day we're in the woods for the most part, doing the glades, having a great time. And actually we're staying at one of the cabins there. And for me, it was a bit easier to just take the lift back up and shoot across to the cabins that we're staying in instead of, taking my skis off and then walking in ski boots. Most people know that's not great. I mostly ski with snowboarders, so it's not as annoying for them. For me, I was also having a lot of issues with the front part of my boot, so it was just really, really extra uncomfortable to walk in. So I was just like, I'm going to do one last run. Yep, I said it. And I usually never say that. I was like, I'm going to do one last run, go up this chair, and I'm going to shoot across. That way I don't have to, get off my skis, and I'll be able to just pull up right there. And it happened. Again, last run. It was the last run of the day. It was right when the mountain was closing, on a green, of all things. It's always on a green, or, again, you got to really pay attention on the mountain. And for me, I was just kind of bopping around, hitting a couple side hits, having fun, swooping up, swooping down. And it now kind of getting that image back in my head. It was intense. I went off a little kind of side hit, and all my momentum started just kind of going forward. And my ski pole I let go of, but it got caught underneath my wrist, and that just planted into the ground as my body is trying to go flat on the ground. So as you can imagine and visualize, my shoulder was completely behind the back of my body, and I kind of just folded in half almost too, and I felt a really kind of sharp pain in my hip, and then I ended up yard sailing. So that's when everything just goes everywhere. It's a term for when you wipe out pretty good and you lose all your equipment. It's called a yard sail. So I fall, really, really hurt. And for me, I've had my shoulder dislocate with my Ehlers-Danlos. I've had joints go in and out, but this one felt different. It didn't it felt like more. It felt like there was something else happened. The funny part of this, about 2 or 3 runs before that, I was on the lift. I had the pleasure of going up with one of the awesome ski patrol people that work there. Always have a great conversations with them whenever I'm on the mountain. Sure enough, this guy rolls up and he's just like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh no." It was the same ski patrol guy that I rode up a couple lifts ago with, and he was chilling at the top of the ski patrol and then came down, and him and another ski patrol guy had to toboggan me down. I had to get in the sled, and yeah, it was not good. The adrenaline, I feel like, started wearing off, and it really, really started hurting. At that point, I only could focus on my shoulder and my shoulder pain, and it was a lot. So yeah, I got to do a very uncomfortable toboggan ride to the bottom, and then they actually had a snowmobile come at some point because we were kind of getting to a flat hill spot, and I'm like, in my head, I'm wondering as I'm in intense pain. I'm like, how is he gonna do this? He does not have the momentum. I'm a pretty big dude, and kudos to that team for making it happen. But yeah, they strapped me up to the snowmobile, which made sense. I just, again, wasn't really thinking aside from that, and I was just trying to separate my thoughts from the pain. Yeah, so I get down, and I have kind of a tourniquet that they put me in, and I was like, hey, can you guys just pop it back in? Because in my head I'm like, oh, it must be out, but then I'm like, I don't know, and he's like, no, I think you got something else going on, and we don't do that here. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that was something you don't do. In that moment, my partner was able to kind of get a little kit together for us to, inevitably, we had to go to the hospital, get some emergency care, and so at this point, I'm still at ski patrol. We're kind of evaluating everything. I had to fill out this incident report, or I guess they filled it out, kind of going over what happened, how long I've been skiing there, a bunch of kind of random, but important questions, so to say. And yeah, at that point, I was like, this really isn't good. And I have a high pain tolerance, and I was like, I am very much hurting and in pain. So at that point, we begin our trip to the ER, and feel like you don't always kind of get the answers that you're looking for right there. And I understand, it's very much an orthopedic issue, and I was going to I wouldn't say small hospital in New Hampshire, but my expectations weren't super crazy in terms of answers and stuff like that. So I get there and just kind of hurting for a while, and eventually they give me some pain medication to kind of help out with that, and then they do x-rays, and that's all they can kind of do at that point. And they're like, it doesn't look broken, but it looks weird. That was pretty much what they said. So for me, it was just like, okay. And they like, you need to find an orthopedic surgeon. And at that point, my longtime orthopedic surgeon of over a decade retired in January. So, and then this happened in February. So in my head, I'm like, oh man, this isn't good. And with my Ehlers-Danlos, I'm really particular about who will work on me with my orthopedic issues, and how, I do need someone that understands my condition. That being said, I have tried to do a lot of research and get more knowledge on my condition in general, and one of the things that I found along the way was a Ehlers-Danlos directory for doctors that understand or at least know something about EDS. So I went there, I checked it out, and lo and behold, I found one of the best rated doctors I've seen in a long time who specializes in my condition. Granted, he is pretty far away. That being said, I have tried to do a lot of research and get more knowledge on my condition in general, and one of the things that I found along the way was a Ehlers-Danlos directory for doctors that understand or at least know something about EDS. So I went there. I checked it out, and lo and behold, I found one of the best rated doctors I've seen in a long time who specializes in my condition. Granted, he is pretty far away, and crazy enough, most of the time I never have this luck. He was actually within network of my insurance, which that was a great thing for this scenario because, again, my doctor recently retired in January, and I had my injury in February. So, and thankfully, I think I'll have him for quite a bit of time. So I'm excited to be able to. I shouldn't say excited, but I was happy that I was able to find a proper replacement for my other orthopedic surgeon, and now I have someone that is, I think, super qualified to be able to handle future surgeries that I inevitably will end up getting. I make my first appointment and do that whole bit of it. I, get some imaging done, X-ray, MRI, end up getting a CAT scan at some point. Lo and behold, I definitely did more damage than I initially anticipated. I had a break and some cartilage come off and tore my labrum pretty bad and had a tear in my bicep and tricep area and some other things along the way, but that was kind of the gist of it. Been waiting for getting surgery because I did have to let that particular break had to heal. And simultaneously, as I don't have this raging pain in my shoulder, which I still actually do deal with a lot of pain in it because it does still, subluxation and comes out, and it's not in place and it just needs to get fixed. But along the way, I actually discovered I also have a labrum tear in my hip as well, and it's overgrown bone, which either I was born with or it was something that happened from when I played a bunch of sports growing up. It can happen to a lot of people that played adolescent sports. So yeah, I have a double labrum tear, which, I think is, that's just, I feel like that's just like the icing, I feel like, on the cake is, the universe. I don't know. I think it's funny to me. I think it's funny. I don't know. I just have the same type of tear, just in a different joint, and obviously some more things going on with the shoulder. But yeah, so, I got the imaging done, and it was definitely, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was, I guess, that bad, and I didn't really know what I was in for with this injury, and how much, it would affect me. And for me, on top of it, I also still have that residual wrist injury, as I think I briefly talked about in a previous episode, but I have my right wrist, which doesn't really work great because I still technically need surgery on that, but that is much lower on the surgery list now. So I have a shoulder that I can't really lift anything with on my left side. I have my right hip that's pretty banged up and have a good limp. And when I'm limping, it can also affect my shoulder because it hurts. So yeah, it's certainly been a lot on top of my condition that I also have that, it just creates laxicity in joints and such that nature. But for me, surprisingly enough, one of the issues that I've been having preparing for surgery is getting my mobility back because I had to have it in a sling for so long. And usually with the EDS, and not everyone is, bend over backwards and, all this bendy, people think of us as super bendy circus people. And ironically enough, I do circus stuff. I've actually been having issues with my mobility because it was, basically up against my chest in a sling for so long. It did end up getting stiff over time. And I've noticed that in certain joints. And one thing that I've seen, which I thought was interesting, is because our joints don't necessarily work as well, our muscles have to compensate for our joints that don't work as well with EDS. Our muscles tend to be in a hypertonic state a lot of the times and always kind of freaking out, so to say, and always just, tense, and can cause actual tightness in our joints because over time, the longer they stiffen up and all that, our muscles, they can cause those issues. So I'm not super surprised that it's happening. And the more that I've been trying to get more mobility back, and if I'm too aggressive, then I end up feeling like I plateau or I'm going backwards because I'm just aggravating the shoulder too much, and then it tenses up, and then I feel like I'm not getting to the place I want to be. And the more mobility I've been gaining, the more it dislocates and comes out of place. So it's not a great place to be in, and it's been a bit of a painful journey. And unfortunately, at the time of this recording, my surgery actually got postponed, and want to get to a better place according to my doctor. And because it's such an extensive surgery, he wants to make sure I can get as much mobility back as possible, if not all. And something that's interesting that I found with some of my surgeries, I feel like I don't know what a normal person's range of motion is. For me, like, my right arm, I can still, and before my injury with my left arm, I could scratch my whole back with one hand, and now it's not there, and it's been a lot. It's been a lot for sure. And of course, after the injury, the initials, like, I wish that didn't happen. I wish that didn't, but that's the way, life comes at you on life's time, not your time. So I think that's something people need to consider, and, try to give yourself a little bit of grace, but also, keep in mind you can still keep trucking forward in times like these. And I'm really blessed to have an awesome partner that's really helped and, make my life a bit easier. So, big shout out to my partner for holding it down and, being my other arm, so to say. And, I still, one thing I've learned with my EDS is, you gotta keep adapting and overcoming. Touching on, adapting and overcoming, I do want to talk about how this has affected my life and how I've been doing things differently, or, what kind of went through during this whole situation. I would say for me, I've definitely had my fair share of times where I have been immobilized or, just not having everything working properly in terms of, my joints, and, kind of very, I guess, comes in waves in terms of that. But I think when there's multiple things going on, and honestly, the shoulder is just a whole different beast. It certainly has affected, me, and, I've been trying to just keep moving forward and doing things that I can. So, I haven't been as physically active as I was before, and, doing things physically have been a bit more of a struggle for me right now. And I've had to adapt on ways I do things, or just, rely on some people for help, which it can be difficult, and can certainly be a challenge in those times of, I guess, feeling still and stuck a bit. I think a big part of this in adapting and overcoming is, you want to rethink how you can still stay productive. For me, the great thing about voiceover is I'm still able to continue to do that, and I'm still able to do a lot of back-end things, though I'm not necessarily at my peak physical game in terms of my injuries and everything. I, again, still am able to, work on my website, be able to do this more, and really fully dive into voiceover, which I've had the blessing of being able to do, and, things have been going really great in terms of the direction with my voiceover career. And I've been able to actually dedicate more time to it. So that's been really, a silver lining to this, is being able to really dive in 100% into voiceover. And, for some people, they, it kind of just starts for a long time, not even just start, for many people it's a side thing, but for me, due to my circumstances right now, it's becoming a full thing, which is really awesome. And it's I always try to, the universe always works in mysterious ways, and what I take from that is being able to find ways to still stay productive and finding out different methods to do everyday things that you don't really think of until your shoulders coming out of place when you're bending over and trying to do stuff. So and just things that I've had to deal with this whole situation. But at the same token, I feel like it certainly has made me stronger. You can certainly let this get to you, and bad injuries can certainly get to people's heads. So I certainly would love to hear if anyone has been through, kind of a similar situation in terms of being, I guess immobilized for a bit, and life changes. I'd love to hear what people's input on what they did to get through that and what they got out of it, and what they learned from it, So certainly reach out, and I want to hear what people have to say with that. Bouncing off the last episode a little bit, I guess, giving yourself permission to pause and reset and find new ways to be productive. And I feel like there was moments during this whole thing that I just needed to kind of chill. And, I know that my limitations were different during this process that I'm dealing with. And if anything, I feel like I've found ways to be even more productive, which is really awesome. I've learned to try to be more patient with myself, resting and giving myself some grace. And, I think when people are in these situations, you got to give yourself some grace. And, I think there's a big difference between quitting and resting and, giving yourself that time to reset and be that much more productive. If you're running on fumes and, you have a full schedule, most of the time you're going to struggle. Something's going to go on, so do what you can to get your body to a point where you feel recharged and you're able to take on the task that you want to do. And, slowing down, I think sometimes is one of the most, I would say, the bravest thing that you could do, in terms of for your mental health, physical health, everything, all things in between. So being able to give yourself that time and reset and recenter and figure out your next move, I think is huge. So don't forget about that. And, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, I recommend checking that out too. If this is one of your first episodes you're checking out. So with all that being said, I would love to hear what your guys' version of, quote unquote, what your last run is. And I want to see what you guys did to get past it. And, I'm interested to see what people have to say about their stories and stuff that they've overcome. Again, this whole podcast is about, I think adapting, overcoming, and persevering. So I think people need to know that, when you hit tough times, you can still be productive and you can still keep moving forward. And, what's the saying? Diamonds are built under pressure, something along those lines. So, just keep that in mind. You're much more powerful than you think. Your mind is very powerful. So don't forget that when you have tough times. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I'm excited to hear some stories and some things from you guys. So I appreciate everyone listening. Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited for the next episode to come. Well, that about wraps it up. Thanks for tuning in to Mike Happens Podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe on Spotify and available on my website, voiceswithj.com, and other streaming services. And join me each episode as we explore the beautiful, hilarious, and inspiring ways life shapes our stories. Until next time, remember, every story matters, especially yours.